The phone rang at 4 in the morning. I have spent most of my adult life flinching at the sound of a phone in the dark, the way some people flinch at thunder, because nothing good has ever travelled to me through a phone line before sunrise. My hand was already reaching for the receiver before my mind had caught up with my body. Mrs. Halloran, this is Dr. Singh calling from St. Augustine Medical Centre. I'm afraid I have very difficult news about your son. We need you to come right away. The world tilted underneath the bed. I am 66 years old. I had buried my husband 11 years earlier after a long, slow cancer that I had time to prepare for, the way you prepare a room for a visitor. I had no preparation at all for this. My son, Adrian, my only child, my brilliant, soft-eyed, watchful boy of 38, could not possibly be dying in a room a 40-minute drive from my front door. It was not the order in which the universe was supposed to do these things. I arrived at the hospital in the clothes I had been sleeping in, with a coat over them and a pair of boots I had pulled on without socks. A woman at the reception desk took one look at me and walked around the counter rather than make me follow her, and that was how I knew, before any doctor had said anything, that I had already lost him. They took me to a small, windowless room with 2 armchairs and a box of tissues placed too neatly on a side table, and Dr. Singh, who looked very tired and very young, sat down across from me and told me that my son had suffered a catastrophic pulmonary embolism in his sleep. There had been no warning. There had been nothing anyone could have done. He had, in the doctor's quiet phrasing, gone with a great deal of dignity. He had been pronounced at 2:41. He was already gone before the hospital ever called me. Hours passed in a way I cannot really account for. There were forms. There were decisions about a body that 14 hours earlier had been my son, and that I now had to make choices about as if it were a piece of administrative business. It was almost noon by the time my daughter-in-law, Marisol, finally arrived. She walked into the hospital in a pressed cream-coloured coat, oversized sunglasses pushed up on her head, her hair brushed, her face made up with the careful, neutral discretion of a woman who has chosen restraint and wants to be seen choosing it. There was traffic, she offered, without quite looking at me. And I had to arrange for someone to pick up Theo from school. I had already called Theo's school. I had already spoken to his teacher. I had already arranged for him to spend the afternoon with the parents of his closest friend, so that he would not be sitting alone in an empty classroom while the news of his father came at him sideways. The fact that Marisol had not done any of this, that she had not even thought to do any of this in the 8 hours since the hospital had called her first, before they had called me, was telling. But it was not surprising. It was a more precise version of a pattern I had been watching for years and had been unable or unwilling to name. Adrian is gone, I said, because there was no other way to say it. She made a small, round sound with her mouth. Oh. Her hand came up to her throat, and the gesture would have looked completely natural on any woman in any waiting room in the country, except that for 1/2 second, the half second before the hand reached her collarbone, I saw her face do something else. It was a small flicker, the kind of thing you would miss if you had not spent 40 years of your professional life studying micro-expressions in graduate students who were trying to lie to me about why their dissertations were late. It was relief. A glimmer of it. Then calculation. Then the appropriate expression of shock arriving on schedule, the way an actor arrives at a cue. The pause was 1/4 of a second long. It was the longest 1/4 second of my life. I am going to stop here for a moment because I want to tell you who I am before I tell you what I did about that 1/4 second. I am Cordelia Halloran. I spent 34 years on the faculty of a small but serious university in upstate New York, in the Department of Psychology, where I taught for most of that time a graduate-level seminar on the methodology of behavioral observation. I am not, I want to be clear, anyone special. There are hundreds of women like me at small universities across this country. Women who taught their seminar twice a year, who advised their dissertations, who attended their faculty meetings, and who retired with a small pension and a great many filing cabinets full of student work. What I have, and the only thing I have, is 34 years of practice in watching what people's faces actually do, as distinct from what they intend their faces to do. I am, in other words, harder to lie to than most people. That was the inheritance my career left me. I did not know that morning in a hospital waiting room that I was about to need every hour of it. The rest of that day was paperwork I do not remember. By the evening, Theo had been told. He was 9 years old. His teacher and I sat with him on a small rug in his bedroom, and we said the only true sentence we had, which was that his father had been alive last night and was not alive now, and that none of it was anyone's fault, and that we would all be very sad for a long time, and that being sad was the right thing to be. He cried for a long time. He held a stuffed bear his father had bought him when he was 4, and he asked us, 3 different times, in 3 different ways, whether his father had been frightened at the end. We told him he had been asleep. He took that in with the grave seriousness of a small child who has been told something he is going to need to carry, and then he climbed into my lap and would not let me leave the house. And I did not leave it. I slept on the floor of his bedroom that night with my coat over me as a blanket, and Marisol slept, as far as I could tell from the line of light under her door, with her phone in her hand. That same evening, just past 8 o'clock, a man I had never met arrived at the house and asked for Marisol. He was perhaps 48, tailored coat, soft leather briefcase. He had the kind of handshake men cultivate in industries where the handshake is part of the product. Marisol introduced him to me at the door as a colleague of Adrian's from one of his investment groups, here to help with the practical side. His name was Devereaux Marsh. He looked at me with a kind of polite, professional sympathy that did not contain any of the actual softness sympathy normally requires. He stayed for 40 minutes. They spoke at the dining table at the far end of the house with their voices lowered. Twice, I heard Marisol laugh. Both times, the laugh was cut short halfway through, as if she had remembered, mid-sound, what room she was supposed to be in. The day after that, my son's attorney arrived. His name was Owen Whitfield, and he had been Adrian's closest friend since their first week of law school. He had been one of 2 groomsmen at the wedding. He had spent every Christmas with us for 16 years. He came to my front door with his eyes already red, and he held me for a very long time without saying anything. And when he finally stepped back, he said, "Cordelia, there are things in his will. We need to meet. As soon as you and Marisol can both come in. The day after tomorrow." His voice had the careful, deliberate flatness of a man who has been doing legal work for 20 years and knows how to keep what he is feeling out of his sentences. I had never heard him speak that way to me before. I marked it. Marisol was on her phone when I told her about the appointment. She nodded and said, "Fine," without looking up. Then, 10 minutes later, she walked into the kitchen where I was making Theo a piece of toast he was not going to eat, and she said in a voice that was deliberately casual, "Cordelia, I was thinking, maybe Theo could come with me to my parents' house in the country for a few days, just for a change of scenery. He shouldn't be in this house right now." I looked at her. She did not look at me. "I would prefer," I said, "that Theo stay here, in his own room, in his own bed, with familiar things, until we have a better sense of the routine that will help him. His grief counselor at school recommends that strongly for a child his age." She blinked at the word counselor, and I saw her recalculate. "Of course," she said after another half-second. "Of course. You know best." She did not bring it up again that day. I want to tell you about Marisol, because to understand what happened, you have to understand who she was when my son met her. Adrian had been 32. Marisol had been 31 and had been working at a small but glossy lifestyle magazine in the city, editing what they called the elevated home section. She was beautiful, in the way certain women are beautiful. Symmetrical, expensive, designed. Adrian had been an environmental attorney by training, but had increasingly moved, over the last 7 or 8 years of his life, into the legal end of clean energy development. He was thoughtful and shy, and absolutely useless at parties. And the first time he brought Marisol home for Sunday dinner, I watched her organise a room of 17 of our friends and family inside of 40 minutes, with the same economy of motion that very good waitstaff use. And I watched my son look at her with the kind of stunned, grateful disbelief that men get on their faces when a woman like that has decided to find them charming. I knew, watching that dinner, that he was going to ask her to marry him. I also knew, watching the way her eyes moved around the dining room, doing inventory, that she had already made her own decision about him, and that her decision had not, primarily, been about him. I did not say a word. I am going to be honest about that. For 11 years, I did not say a word. I told myself I was being a good mother-in-law. I told myself that what looked to me like calculation was, perhaps, just competence. That a woman who knows what she wants is not the same thing as a woman who is taking. I told myself that the small flickers I saw, the way Marisol's voice slid sideways when she spoke to me, the way she steered every conversation about Adrian's career toward his earnings, the way she introduced him at her own work functions as a partner-track attorney at a major firm, rather than as the husband she had chosen, were the kinds of small flickers any mother-in-law tells herself she is imagining. I told myself mostly that my son was a grown man and that if he loved her, my job was to keep my mouth shut and to be there when he needed me. So I kept my mouth shut. I was there for them. I babysat. I cooked. I learned to like the wine she preferred. I was, in the careful, private vocabulary of myself, a good mother-in-law, and not a difficult one. I am not going to apologise for any of that, because it was the right call at the time. But it cost me, eventually, more than I had ever calculated. Theo had been born in the 3rd year of their marriage. Adrien had been transformed by him in the way certain men are transformed by becoming a father. The way some men finally meet, in the face of an infant, the version of themselves they had been quietly waiting to become. He had cleared his schedule for a month after the birth. He had read parenting books at the kitchen table in the evenings, marking up the margins the way he marked up briefs. Marisol had returned to her job at 6 weeks and had, by Theo's 1st birthday, been promoted to a role with substantially more travel. By the time Theo was 4, the parenting had been split, in a way no one ever quite said out loud, into Adrien, with help from his mother on Saturdays, and Marisol, when convenient. I have wondered, every day of the 3 months since my son's death, whether Adrien was lonelier in his marriage than he ever let me see. The honest answer is yes. The honest answer is also that he never once said so, not to me, because he was that kind of son. I want to tell you one specific thing, because it is the thing I keep coming back to. About a year before he died, Adrien drove out to my house on a Saturday afternoon by himself. Theo was at a birthday party. Marisol was, he said, in Miami for work. He came in. He drank a cup of coffee at my kitchen table. He spoke very little. After about 40 minutes, he said, almost to himself, "Mum, if anything ever happened to me, and nothing is going to, I'm fine, but if anything ever did, I would want to know that Theo had you. Not in a visits with grandma way, in a real way." I had set down my coffee. I had said, "What is going on, Adrien?" He had shaken his head. "Nothing. Tired. Long week. I'm just saying." He had stayed another 40 minutes and then he had driven home, and I had not, because I am the kind of mother who decided 11 years ago to keep my mouth shut. Asked any of the questions I should have asked. I have spent the last 3 months thinking about that conversation almost continuously. I am telling you about it now because, as it turned out, Adrien had not been speaking idly. He had been telling me something he could not yet bring himself to say in full sentences. He had been giving me a key. I just had not understood it was a key. The meeting in Owen Whitfield's office was scheduled for 10 in the morning on the second day after Adrian's death. I drove myself. Marisol drove herself in a separate car and arrived 7 minutes late and sat down across the table from me in a charcoal blazer that I am almost certain was new. Owen, the attorney, opened a folder. He cleared his throat. He said, "Before I read the relevant portions of the will, I want to remind both of you that everything I am about to read is exactly as Adrian instructed. Everything in this document was reviewed by him personally. Every clause was his." That sentence was not a flourish. It was a warning. I had been to enough faculty hearings over 34 years to recognize the tone an attorney uses when he is bracing a room. I sat up a little straighter. He began to read. There were the standard preliminary clauses. There were 2 charitable bequests in modest amounts that I had known Adrian intended to make. Then Owen turned the page. "To my wife, Marisol Halloran," he read, "I leave the property known as the Lake Cottage at Indian Hollow, my personal investment portfolio held at Northbridge Wealth Management, and the proceeds of a term life insurance policy in the amount of $700,000. Marisol nodded. Her face did the small, calm, pleased thing of a woman who had assumed, going in, that everything was going to go more or less her way, and who was now being confirmed in her assumption. "To my mother, Cordelia Halloran," Owen continued, in exactly the same flat tone. "I leave the residence at 412 Hollyhock Lane, both vehicles registered in my name, the entirety of the contents of my checking and savings accounts at First Heritage Bank, the entirety of the contents of the trust account at the same institution, and, in trust, the deed to the second residence at 8 Wilbur Street, formerly held by my late father." Marisol's face did not move for 2.5 seconds. I counted. She was very still. Then, very slowly, she said, "I'm sorry." "The house?" Owen looked up. "Yes, the Hollyhock house. Our house. Adrian's house," Owen said. "The deed has been in his name only since before your marriage. It was never converted to joint property." He slid a document across the table toward her without making her ask. "And the trust account." She had not raised her voice yet, but she had stopped using contractions. "The trust account is the educational trust for Theodore, established by Adrian 3 years ago. The named trustee is Cordelia Halloran." She blinked. "I'm the trustee for my own son's education." "You are not, in fact, the named trustee. Adrian's mother is." "When was that decided?" 3 months ago." Marisol's hand was now flat on the table. Her wedding ring, a thin gold band with a single small stone, caught the overhead light. "Adrian did not tell me about any of these revisions." "He was not required to," Owen said evenly. "The estate is his to distribute as he saw fit. The revisions were properly drafted, signed, witnessed, and notarized. Everything is in order." The word order landed in the room like something heavy. Marisol turned to me. The expression on her face was not yet anger. It was, instead, the expression of someone re-evaluating the chessboard. Her eyes did the small, precise tracking I had seen her eyes do at dinner parties, when she was assessing whether a stranger was the kind of stranger worth being charming to. "Cordelia, this is obviously a misunderstanding. Adrian adored you. He would never have meant to put any of us in this position. I am sure if we sit down together, just the 3 of us, and reread the document—" "There is nothing to reread, Marisol," I said. I had been practicing the calm in my voice the whole previous night. It came out cleanly. Owen has been very clear. The document is what it is. Cordelia, be reasonable. The house, Theo's house, the only home he has ever known, will continue to be Theo's home, I said. I have no plans to disturb that. I think we should not make any large decisions in the first 2 weeks." Her face thanked me, briefly, and then went somewhere I could not entirely read. I knew, even sitting at that table, that the gratitude was tactical. She had heard the first 2 weeks, and she had heard a window. After Marisol left the office, and she left fast, with the brisk excuse that she had to go check on Theo, who was, in fact, at school, Owen closed his door. He sat down on the corner of his desk. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "Cordelia, I have something for you." He went to his safe. He came back with a sealed envelope in my son's handwriting. "He left this with me 11 weeks ago. He told me to give it to you privately, after the will reading, with no one else in the room." I held it for a long time before I opened it. My hands shook the way hands shake when they are being asked to receive a letter from someone who has, until that moment, only ever spoken to you in person. "Mum," it began, and I had to put the page down on Owen's desk and put my hand over my mouth. I did not cry. I went very still. After perhaps 30 seconds, I picked it back up. "Mum, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are sitting in Owen's office, and I am very sorry. I have been trying to find the words to say what I am about to say to you in person for almost a year. I could not find them. I am sorry I waited. There is no time now, and there is no other person I can write this letter to. My marriage has not been a marriage for some time. I want to be careful about that sentence, because Marisol is the mother of my son, and I do not want, even from the grave, to make her into a villain in a story she did not fully write. But the truth is that, sometime in the last 2 or 3 years, she has begun to see Theo and me as instruments of a life she is trying to build, rather than as the life itself. I have watched her, slowly, transfer her loyalty to a person who is not me. I have known his name for 14 months. I have not confronted her. I made that choice because I did not want to risk losing daily access to my son in a contested custody arrangement while she figured out whether she actually intended to leave. I made it consciously. I made it knowing what it would cost me. I will not ask you to agree with the choice. I will only ask you to understand that I was alone with it. I am sorry for that. I should have called you. I did not call you because I knew that if I called you, I would not be able to stop myself from crying, and I did not have time, this year, to be a person who cried. I have spent the last 11 months quietly putting things in place. I have moved the Hollyhock house, the cars, and our father's old house on Wilbur Street into structures that route directly to you. I have created a trust for Theo's education with you as trustee, because Marisol cannot be allowed control of those funds. I have left her enough that she has no honest grievance. The lake cottage, the investment portfolio, the policy, by any reasonable measure, she has been provided for. But she has also been prevented, by the structure of all of this, from doing the thing I have come to believe she would do if she had the chance, which is to take my son to a place far enough away that I could no longer reach him on a regular basis. I have prevented that. From beyond, apparently, the grave. I am asking one thing of you. Watch Theo. Watch him very carefully. If you see signs that she is preparing to leave, to relocate him, to compromise his stability, you will need to act before I can warn you. Owen has the rest of the file. There are documents in it I did not put into the will. He will give them to you when you ask. Do not ask for them while she is in the room. Do not let her know what you know until you know what you need to do. I trust you to see this clearly. You have been seeing things clearly for as long as I have been your son. That is the one thing I have always been able to count on. I love you, Mum. I am so sorry I did not call. Adrian. I sat in Owen's office for a long time. Owen did not interrupt me. He waited, the way good attorneys and good friends both know how to wait. Finally, I said, "Owen, he said you have a file." "I do," he said quietly. He went to his safe a second time. He came back with a thick brown accordion file with my son's handwriting on the tab. He laid it down on the desk between us. "Cordelia, before you open this, I want you to understand something. Adrian did not show me everything that is in this file. He told me there were a number of items he had collected himself, that he wanted you to be the first person to see. He said you would know what to do with them. He trusted your judgment more than he trusted his own on this particular question. He said that exactly. He said, 'My mother sees people. I see clauses.'" I almost laughed. It was the first almost laugh I had had in 3 days. I took the file home. I did not open it that night, because Theo was in the house and I did not yet know what was in it, and I did not want him in any room of any house I was sitting in when I opened it. I waited until the next day, when Marisol had taken Theo to the dentist for an appointment I had reminded her of 3 times, and I sat down on my couch and I opened it. It contained, in summary, the following: 8 months of itemized phone records obtained through means I did not, in that moment, examine too closely. A printed exchange of text messages between Marisol and a man saved in her phone as DM, covering the same 8-month window. Photographs taken at a distance by a professional of Marisol and Devereaux Marsh, the colleague who had come to the house the night of Adrian's death, entering and leaving a hotel in the financial district on 6 separate occasions across 4 months. A bank record showing a wire transfer of $41,000 from a joint account I had not been aware existed into an LLC registered in Marisol's name alone. And, at the back of the file, paper-clipped to a manila envelope, a single typed page with Adrian's signature at the bottom, which read, in part, "If I have died, and Marisol has, in the course of the first 90 days, indicated any intention of relocating Theo outside the immediate area, or of bringing into our home any person other than family in a parental capacity, or of seeking modification of the custodial arrangements I have created, then you may instruct Owen to file the prepared emergency petition referenced as Exhibit C." Exhibit C was at the very back of the file. It was a draft emergency custody petition, fully prepared, naming me as the proposed temporary guardian of Theodore Halloran. It was dated 4 months before Adrian's death. He had drafted this 4 months before he died. He had been preparing for the possibility of his own absence, not because he knew he was about to die, but because he knew, with the cold clarity of a man who had spent 20 years reading legal documents, that his wife was preparing to leave him in a way that would cost him his son, and that he might not survive the legal battle of preventing that. He had been hedging against a divorce. He had inadvertently hedged against a much shorter timeline. I sat on my couch for a very long time, and I cried the kind of cry I had not let myself cry yet. The cry of a mother who finally understands how alone her son had been at the end. Then I wiped my face. Then I started taking notes. The strategy I chose was the only strategy I could choose, because it was the strategy my son had effectively asked me to choose. I would not confront Marisol with what I knew. I would not let her know I had the file. I would not let her know I had read Adrian's letter. I would, instead, perform, for as long as it took, exactly the version of myself she was already prepared to underestimate. The slightly bewildered, slightly grief-stricken older mother-in-law who could be relied upon for childcare and would not be a complication. I would be helpful. I would be agreeable. I would offer to keep Theo on the nights she needed to process. I would, in the language of the discipline I had spent 34 years teaching, gather observational data on her behavior under naturalistic conditions, in real time, with the cooperation of the very person being observed. I would document everything. and I would wait for her to do, on her own, the things my son had already predicted she would do. She did them. She did them very quickly. Within 3 weeks of Adrienne's funeral, Marisol began traveling. Day trips at first, framed as estate appointments and meetings with Adrienne's advisor. Then overnights, then a 4-day stretch she described vaguely as a few days at a wellness retreat my doctor strongly recommended. On every one of those stretches, she dropped Theo at my house, sometimes without calling first. He came over carrying his small backpack and his bear. Every time I made a quiet note in a small green spiral notebook I kept in the drawer of my bedside table. The dates, the duration, Theo's emotional state on arrival, Theo's emotional state on departure, anything he said that was relevant. He said a great deal that was relevant. He was 9 years old and he was used to being looked at carefully, and he had a habit, like his father, of telling the truth, more or less, in passing. "Grandma, Uncle Dev was at the house again last night." "Grandma, Mum said maybe we'd go on a trip, but I shouldn't tell you yet because it's a surprise." "Grandma, Mum got a phone call and afterwards she was crying, but the not sad kind." I wrote them all down. I wrote them down in the calm, steady hand I had used for 34 years of advisory notes on doctoral students, because that is the hand my brain reaches for when I am being careful. By the 5th week, Uncle Dev, Devereux Marsh, the man from the night of the death, was at the Hollyhock house almost every weekend. By the 6th week, Marisol mentioned, casually, that she had been looking at some opportunities out of state, just exploring. By the 7th week, she asked me to keep Theo for a long weekend, while she sorted out some things. When she came to collect him on the Sunday evening, she stayed for 40 minutes longer than she needed to, and she sat at my kitchen table with a glass of water she did not drink. And she said the sentence I had been waiting for her to say, almost word for word, the way Adrienne's letter had predicted she would say it. "Cordelia, I have been thinking. The house, the Hollyhock house, has so much of Adrienne in it. Every room, every photo. It's not healthy for Theo. Or for me. I have been looking at a beautiful place in Santa Fe. The light is supposed to be miraculous for grief. There are wonderful schools." She paused. "Of course, I'd want you to visit constantly. Constantly. You'd be a fixture. We'd build you your own little casita." I held her gaze. I did the thing I have spent 34 years coaching nervous graduate students to do. I let the silence sit. After about 4 seconds, she filled it, the way she had filled it at every dinner I had ever sat at with her. "It's just an idea. I'm exploring." I called Owen the next morning. I told him the sentence. I told him about Devereux Marsh, about the wellness retreat, about the wire transfer to the LLC, about the phone records, and about the fact that my grandson had begun, in the last week, to ask me with some regularity whether he could move into my guest room for real, just for a while. Owen was quiet for a long time on his end. Then he said, "Cordelia, Adrienne gave me a name. He told me if it ever came to this, to call her first. Her name is Margaret Cho. She is the best family court attorney in this part of the state. She does not take on every case, but she will take on this one, because she promised Adrienne she would." I did not know my son had been having those conversations. I cried again, briefly, in a way that I had begun to find practical and almost organizing, the way some people find a cup of coffee organizing. Then I called Margaret Cho. Margaret Cho did not waste time. She read the file in one afternoon. She filed the emergency petition my son had drafted, with a single amendment to update the dates and the supporting evidence. She arranged for a court-approved child psychologist to interview Theo at his school the following week, gently, on a day Marisol thought he was simply attending class. She walked me, line by line, through what was about to happen. The petition would be served on Marisol on a Tuesday afternoon at her place of work. There would be a preliminary hearing 6 business days later. The judge had been chosen for her record on cases involving relocation. The proposed temporary order would prohibit Marisol from removing Theo from the state, pending the outcome of the hearing. I should expect Marisol to react badly to being served. I should not, under any circumstances, take her calls in the first 48 hours. I should keep my phone on, and I should keep Theo with me. And I should call Margaret immediately if anything unexpected happened. Cordelia, Margaret said, leaning forward across her desk on the last day before the petition was served. I want you to understand something. Your son did the hard work. We are following his blueprint. The only thing you have to do now is sit very still and let the documents do what they are going to do. That, it turned out, was harder than it sounded. Marisol was served on the Tuesday afternoon. She called me 40 minutes later. I did not answer. She called 11 more times that night. She left 2 voicemails that began calmly and ended in a register I had not yet heard out of her in 11 years. She came to my front door at 10:50 p.m. She rang the bell 6 times. Theo, who was asleep in my guest room, yes, the same guest room he had been asking about, made up with the navy comforter he liked, did not wake up. I did not open the door. I stood on the other side of it in my bathrobe with my phone in my hand, and Margaret Cho's number already dialed. And I did not open the door. And after about 4 minutes, Marisol stopped ringing and got back in her car. I watched her taillights from the kitchen window. Then I sat down at the table and wrote down in my green notebook, in the calm, steady hand, Marisol at front door, 10:50 to 10:54 p.m., visibly distressed. Did not open door per counsel's instruction. Theo asleep through episode. The hearing was 6 business days later. I am not going to walk you through it in full. I will tell you only what mattered. Marisol arrived in a navy dress and small pearl earrings, holding a framed photograph of Adrienne that I had seen 3 weeks earlier on a side table in the Hollyhock house. Her attorney, a small, neat man named Theo Larkin, I had not enjoyed the coincidence of his first name, argued that I was a grief-deranged 66-year-old woman who was attempting to misuse a deceased son's last wishes to seize a grandchild from a perfectly competent, surviving mother. Margaret Cho stood up. Margaret Cho introduced into evidence in this order: the phone records, the text exchange with DM, the photographs from the Financial District Hotel, the wire transfer to the LLC, the testimony, in the form of a sworn affidavit, of the court-appointed child psychologist who had spent 2 hours with my grandson and had concluded in her professional opinion that Theo presented elevated anxiety associated with anticipated relocation away from his primary caregivers, who he had identified, without prompting, as my grandma and my teacher, Ms. Reyes. My green notebook, and last, my son's letter to me. I had not wanted the letter read in court. Margaret had asked me, very gently, the night before, whether I would consent to its admission. I had said yes. She had said, Cordelia, he is going to be the loudest voice in that room. He should be. She had been right. When Margaret finished reading the letter, the courtroom was completely silent. The judge, a small woman in her late 50s named Linda Aragon, looked over the rims of her glasses, first at Margaret, then at the opposing table, then at me, and then at Marisol. She did not say anything for what must have been 20 seconds. Then she said, in a voice that was not unkind but was extraordinarily flat, Ms. Halloran, did you know your husband had drafted this petition 4 months before his death? Marisol's face did the thing it had done in Owen's office, on the morning of the will reading, the small, recalculating thing. No, Your Honour, obviously not. And had you, in the last 3 weeks, been considering a relocation to Santa Fe with the minor child? I was exploring options to help my son heal. And had you discussed those options with the petitioner, Ms. Halloran's mother-in-law, in advance? I mentioned it once, casually. And had you, in the last 6 weeks, been involved in a romantic relationship with the gentleman identified in evidence as Devereux Marsh? A long pause. Your Honour, with respect, the timing of personal relationships after the death of a spouse is yes or no, Ms. Halloran? A longer pause. Yes. Thank you. I'll have my ruling in 20 minutes. The ruling, when it came, was 12 minutes long and unanimous in the way only one person can be unanimous. Temporary primary custody to me for an initial period of 90 days. Supervised visitation for Marisol, 3 times weekly, at a court-approved facility. Marisol prohibited from removing the minor child from the state. A full custody evaluation to be completed within those 90 days. The Hollyhock House as my legal property to serve as Theo's primary residence. Devereux Marsh prohibited from being present in any setting at which Theo was also present. Judge Aragon set down her papers. She looked at Marisol. She said, Ms. Halloran, I will be candid with you, because I think the next 90 days will go better for all parties if I am. The court has read your husband's letter. The court has seen the documentation. I am going to suggest you spend the next 90 days demonstrating, in concrete behavioural terms, that you are interested in being a mother to this child, rather than in being his guardian of record while you build a separate life. The court will be watching for that, and the court will not be looking for performance. The court will be looking for the substance. Court is adjourned. Marisol did not look at me as she left the courtroom. Margaret put her hand on my shoulder. Owen, who had come to sit in the back row, walked me out into the hallway, and we did not say anything to each other for a full minute. Then he said, "He would have been proud of you." I said, "He should not have had to be." I'm going to be careful with how I tell you the rest, because the rest is the part that, in a different kind of story, would be the satisfying part, and I am not entirely sure it deserves to be. Marisol attended the first 2 supervised visits. She brought Theo a remote control car at the second one. She missed the 3rd visit entirely. Her attorney called Margaret's office to report a scheduling conflict. She missed the 4th. By the end of the 2nd week, she had filed, through Larkin, a request to modify the supervision order on the grounds that she found it humiliating. The request was denied. By the end of the 4th week, she had stopped requesting visits at all. By the end of the 6th week, she had moved out of the small rental she had taken near her parents' house and was, according to a brief paragraph in a regional business publication that Owen forwarded to me, relocating to the Caribbean for a long-anticipated development opportunity with Devereux Marsh's firm. She did not come to say goodbye to Theo. She sent him, by overnight courier, a card with a $50 gift certificate inside it, and the inscription, "I love you very much. Be good for Grandma. I will see you soon." That was almost 2 years ago. She has not, in fact, seen him soon. She sent another card on his 10th birthday. She did not send one on his 11th. The support payments, agreed to in lieu of a contested settlement, in an amount Margaret described dryly as very generous to Mrs. Halloran given the underlying facts, arrive every month, electronically, with the same automated memo line. They are the only contact we have had with her in 14 months. I want to tell you about Theo, because Theo is the only part of this story that matters now. Theo is 11. He is in the 6th grade. He plays the cello, badly, in the school orchestra, and is very proud of this. He has begun to look, in some lights, exactly like his father, especially around the eyes. He has a small, careful, watchful intelligence that he inherited from both his parents, and that I have tried very gently not to interfere with. He has nightmares once a month on average. He has very good days more often than that. He has begun, in the last 6 months, to ask me harder questions, the kind 9-year-olds do not yet think of. "Grandma, do you think Mum would have left even if Dad hadn't died? Grandma, did Dad know she was going to leave? Grandma, Did Dad ask you to take me? I have answered every one of these questions honestly, in the most age-appropriate version of honest I can find. I have told him that grown-ups sometimes make choices that have nothing to do with how much they love their children, and that those choices say something about the grown-up and nothing about the child. I have told him that yes, his father had been worried, and had taken steps to make sure he would always be safe. I have told him that his father loved him completely, without reservation, until the last minute he was alive, and that this is the one thing in the whole story I am completely certain of. He asked me 6 months ago on a Saturday in the kitchen with a sudden seriousness I had not been prepared for. "Grandma, are you going to die soon?" I sat down across from him. I said, "I am 68 and I am healthy. I take a brisk walk every morning and I see a doctor twice a year, and I plan to be here for a very long time." But Theo, the honest answer is that nobody can promise that. So here is what I can promise. I can promise that the people who love you are not going anywhere on purpose. I can promise that there are written instructions in a folder in the attorney's office that explain exactly who would take care of you if I ever could not. I can promise that you will not be left without a grown-up who knows you and loves you and will fight for you. Your dad made sure of that, and I've made sure of it too. He took that in. He nodded slowly. He said, "Okay." Then he said, "Can I have another piece of toast?" That, I have come to believe, is what grief in a child eventually looks like. Hard question. Hard answer. Toast. The Hollyhock house is, today, our house. I sold my own small house a year ago because it was time and because the commute had begun to wear on me, and I moved into Adrian's old room and turned the master bedroom into a study. Theo kept his room exactly as it was. We have, the two of us, slowly redecorated the rest. The dining room where I once watched Marisol organize 17 of our friends and family in 40 minutes is now a room with a different table in it, and a wall of his school art on the side facing the window. The Wilbur Street house, the one that had been my late husband's, sits empty for now. Owen and I have begun, very tentatively, to plan to renovate it as a college rental, with the proceeds going into Theo's trust. It would have pleased Adrien, who liked things that paid for themselves. The trust itself has grown well under Margaret's investment colleague's careful management. Theo will not have to think about money during his education. He will have to think about other things. I have, in the last 6 months, started writing again. Not academic writing, long letters mostly, to friends I had let drift during the years I was performing the role of agreeable mother-in-law. To my own sister, who lives in Vermont, and who I had not really been honest with since Adrien's wedding. To Adrien occasionally, which I am aware is a thing widows of a certain age do, and which I am not embarrassed about. I write them by hand. I keep them in a small drawer of the study desk. They are not for anyone else. I am 68 years old. I had not, 3 years ago, expected to be a primary caregiver to a child again. I had expected, like everyone my age expects, to be the supplementary grandmother, the one who takes him on Saturdays and gives him too many cookies and sends him home. I had not expected to be the person responsible for whether he made it to the orthodontist, or whether his backpack got packed, or whether his bedtime story got read. I am tired more often than I used to be. I am also, in a way I would not have been able to explain to anyone 3 years ago, more alive than I have been since my husband died. There is something specific that being needed by a child gives you, and I had forgotten the shape of it. I think about my son almost constantly. I think about the quiet, careful 11 months during which he prepared all of this, while sitting across breakfast tables from a wife whose decision to leave him he had already privately understood. I think about how lonely that must have been. I think about the fact that he never called me, even once, to tell me what he was carrying. I think about the conversation in my kitchen a year before he died, when he had said, very softly, "If anything ever happened to me, I would want to know that Theo had you." in a real way. I think about how many sentences mothers miss because they are still telling themselves they are imagining things. I think about the small ways I would do every part of those 11 years differently if I were given them back. I will not be given them back. I do not pretend, even to myself, that I will be. What I have instead is a quiet house, a cello sometimes being practiced in another room, a grandson whose face has, lately, started to look like his father's, a folder of documents in an attorney's safe that my son drafted to protect a child he could not stay alive long enough to protect himself, and a small green notebook in the bedside drawer that I have stopped writing in but have not thrown out. I keep it because it reminds me of who I had to become, very quickly, in the last 3 years. The professor who watched faces for a living. The mother-in-law who finally stopped pretending. The woman who, when her son had laid out a plan from beyond his own life, had been steady enough and stubborn enough to carry it through. Adrian wrote in the last paragraph of his letter to me a sentence I did not know how to read at the time, and that I now read about once a week. He wrote, "You taught me, my whole life, that the truest thing you can do for the people you love is see them clearly. I am asking you to do that one more time, for Theo, when I cannot. I have done my best. I am still doing my best. I have 11 more years of doing my best, probably, before he leaves for college, and after that, more years of a different kind. I am not afraid of those years. I used to be afraid of a great many things. I am afraid of fewer of them now. That, it turns out, is something else my son left me, and he did not have to write it into any will.